My dad used to have a saying. He would say, the fishing is always good. Some days the catching is better than others, but the fishing is always good. My dad loved to hunt and fish. So when you go fishing, well, you need a net or bait or lures. Some lures, like this black and white Lazy Ike, you pretty much need to buy. Okay? And there's some other things in here, bombers and little popping lures and things like that. You pretty much need to buy. But my dad was quite a do-it-yourself kind of guy. And what he would do is he would buy bare hooks, okay, and the materials, and we made lures like this. Here's a little brighter color head on it. So, true, you can buy these, and they go by different names: bass busters, crappie jigs, things like that. But we made them. So my dad would place the bare hooks inside the molds, pour the lead in, let the lead cool, then pop them out. Then he'd paint the lead-colored portions of these, and then in a little line of corrugated cardboard paper, he'd come along with a little dropper and add the eyes. And then we would take chenille and marabou feathers and tie the jigs. And then we'd use clear fingernail polish to seal the knot of the thread that was holding it all together. So, when fishing, one of the biggest challenges is to find the exact color that is going to be hot that day, that the fish are looking for that day. The color of the sky, if there are clouds, if the clouds are white and fluffy, or gray, or dark, that would affect it. Is the water clear, or did it recently rain and get a little bit muddy? So some of those, and water temperature too. So some of those are just some of the considerations for choosing the right colors for the day. Then, of course, there's just dumb luck. The fish that you're looking for is also a consideration. So if you're going after bluegill, you need some... Bluegill have very small mouths. So you need small little jigs like this. But if you're going after crappie, well, now you might start using something more about that size. And then if you're going after bass, then again, you might... yes. Something more like that, or the next size up. So the sizes and the color combinations were important, because once you found what was going to be hot that day, you might need quite a few of them, especially if you're going after crappie and bass, because they like to hide in the underwater grasses and bushes for protection. And if you're fishing in there, often you'll snag your jig, have to break it off, and tie on another one, right? Absolutely. So you never know what you might need. So we would tie these all winter long. We would tie these by the hundreds. So when spring came, we literally had thousands in our tackle boxes. Because you didn't know if you were going to need brown or purple and white, or yellow and yellow, or what color head. You had to be ready. And we were amateurs. Because my dad was such a big hunter and fisherman, he got me started early. Insert embarrassing photo here. Living at Lake Lotawana, we got to fish a lot. And I guess any time that you catch a fish that's almost as long as you are tall, I guess you could call that a big fish, and it might even make TV. Who remembers the weekly local TV show, Harold Ensley, the Sportsman's Friend? Yep. So that's what an old black and white television camera looked like back in 19 whatever it was. So I remember during the interview on TV, Harold Ensley asked me where I caught the fish. That's kind of hard to see the way I'm holding it in the angle. But the top of the fish is about the middle of my chest, and the bottom of the tail is about my ankles. So Harold Ensley asked me where I caught the fish. And he had to ask me the same question more than once because I didn't understand what he was really looking for. You see, when he asked me where I caught the fish, I answered, across the cove. And that was true. I caught it across the cove from our house, but what he was looking for was the name of the lake. Because obviously none of the television viewers knew where I lived or what cove I was talking about. I remember kind of being embarrassed about that when I figured it out later. Well, we were fortunate for fishing at our property because we had two really big things going for us. On the north side of the property, there was a drain pipe that came down, and it brought water draining from the acreage back behind the house. So it was bringing in fresh, natural food for the fish, bugs and stuff like that, right on down here. And particularly the bluegill loved that area. And then over on the north corner of the boathouse, well, that's where we would take our Christmas trees, weighted down with rocks, and sink them, and make a perfect crappie bed around there. Because that's where the crappie love to hang out. So if we wanted to cook up a mess of bluegill for dinner, we go over here, where the drain pipe comes in, choose one of the smaller jigs here, boom, 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 get our bluegill. Now if we wanted some crappie, we go out to the corner of the boathouse, where the crappie bed was, and just bring them in. So kind of opportunity without even going far. Now, fishermen know that there are better times of day and better times of year for catching. All right? Early in the morning and around dusk are prime times. Also in the spring, when the water starts to warm up just a little bit, the fish get just a little bit more active and they start spawning. Okay, that's best. During the heat of the summer, usually isn't so good, except for one way. So we had electric lights out on the corners of the boathouse, so that if we're coming home at night, we could see the boat well. But during the most buggy time of the year, if we turn the lights on at night, the bugs would be drawn to the light, land on the water, and the fish would have their food delivered to them as easy and fast as Jimmy John's. And we'd be there. Well, our gospel text for today has the disciples out fishing. In fact, they've been fishing all night. Now, we don't know, because the Gospels don't tell us, if the disciples were using lanterns over the water to attract the bugs. But they were fishing at night. And I personally believe that they did. That's the best way to fish at night. We find our story in the Gospel of John. And the setting for our story today appears to be during the week lying between Easter and the following Sunday, when Jesus returned to the upper room when Thomas was there. So I'm suggesting this timing, even though John doesn't specifically tell us, because one, the Gospels of Matthew and Mark tell us that the angel at the tomb told the women on Sunday morning that Jesus was going to Galilee and the disciples should go there. And two, the Sunday evening a week later, when Thomas was there, Jesus told his disciples to stay in Jerusalem until they received power from on high. And three, this text tells us that it's the third time that Jesus appeared to his disciples. So the first was being with his disciples, a couple of them, on the road to Emmaus Easter afternoon. And the second being in the upper room without Thomas on Easter night. So this then would be the third time. And we find our story in the 21st chapter of John. Afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, the two other disciples, were together. "I'm going out to fish," Simon Peter told them. And they said, "We'll go with you." So they went out and got into the boat. But that night they caught nothing. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" "No," they answered. He said, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat and you will find some." When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It's the Lord." As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there, with fish on it and some bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish you have just caught." So Simon Peter climbed back into the boat and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153. But even with so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came, took the bread and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the third time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said, "you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep. Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, "Follow me." The word of the Lord. We see a familiar scene here, don't we? Jesus is providing bread and fish. We also see again Jesus using a meal to bring people together. The second part of our story today, we'll come back to the first, but the second part of our story today is often titled, Jesus Reinstates Peter. We remember that the previous week, while Jesus was under arrest, Peter denied even knowing Jesus. He denied him 3 times, right? And in our story today, we see that Jesus asked Peter the same number of times. 3. Do you love me? When Jesus asked him 3 times, do you think that Peter remembered each of those 3 denials? We can't be sure, but the text does tell us that Peter was hurt. Similar to a young boy from Lake Lotawana who didn't really understand a question that was being asked of him, Peter seems to have been thinking that Jesus was talking about how he felt about Jesus. But there was much more to Jesus' questions than that. We see here a very deliberate plan by Jesus. For each of Peter's denials, Jesus wiped it out. Feed my lambs. Take care of my sheep. Feed my sheep. The denials were erased. Also, with each instruction, slightly different, you notice, Jesus was calling for action, not feelings. Jesus is calling for Peter to take care of his children, to serve his children as a servant, and to feed them the Word. Peter was reinstated. In ministry, this is referred to as Jesus giving Peter the keys. The Gospel of Matthew tells us that Jesus told Peter, upon this rock he would build his church, and he would give him the keys to the kingdom of heaven. And our takeaway from this part of the story today is that nobody is beyond redemption. Even one denying Jesus. Now, the first part of our story today is often entitled The Miraculous Catch. Professional fishermen had been fishing all night and came up empty. And then someone on shore, whom they had not yet recognized as Jesus, told them where to throw their net. Now, I suspect that most people might think at this point, who's this guy? What does he know? We're professional fishermen. We know what we're doing. That's a stupid idea. That's a waste of time and energy. But we see that they did what Jesus said and reaped a huge catch. And we see clearly that this was not the disciples' idea. This was not the disciples' plan. In fact, it didn't make sense. However, they listened to Jesus. They did what Jesus said, and miraculous things occurred. And that's the second takeaway for us today. So if we listen closely to Jesus and do what he says, even if it doesn't make sense sometimes, get ready for an amazing ride. Or as Pastor Gary Haddock of North Carolina told me one time, hold on to your hat. Let's pray. Lord, thank you again and again and again for the cross and for Easter. Help us to remember not to get so caught up and entangled in the nets of our lives that we miss hearing what you're telling us. Help us to hear what you're telling us and to have the courage to act upon it. And all God's people said, Amen. Hymn number 370.